Microphone one, hello. All right, so Charlie, we are going to be using mics one and mic two. The presenter is going to be talking into the podium. He is going to be the only in-person presenter. The mics one and two, I'm going to put in the audience. Those are going to be audience Q&A mics. I think we'll just need to check out Zoom and make sure we're getting a solid feed and sending a solid feed. And yeah, I will keep talking through this one. I am on comm right now, so if you need to say anything, I am listening through the comm. Oh, and now I can hear myself through the foldback. Hello, foldback. How are this? It's always weird hearing myself talk to myself. Uh, I mean, you know. But anyway, so. Yep, that is what we need. Check one, two, check. Let me know when you're ready for me to go into. Yes, sir. Yep. Yeah, they're working on it. Copy that. Negative. I'm hearing it all in-house. Got it. I'm okay with that level. That's a good level. Yes, sir. Yeah, I think that sounds good. All right. Copy that. Do you want me to be in-house since that is where the mics are going to be? The mics are not going to be on stage. No, so Rose is coming up to tell me. This is mic two. We're going to have mics one and two in the house. Those are going to be audience only. Let me double check.
Hey everyone, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yeah, same here.
Yes, I can hear you.
Hmm.
He's working on it. I think they might have been getting it through the podium. Can you guys hear me through Zoom?
Yes.
All right, yeah, they were getting out of the podium.
Perfect. So you guys look great up there. I'm assuming you're all going to have your cameras on, and yep. So what we'll do is, you guys can go ahead and leave your cameras on. We will not put you on screen. Can someone just give me a little talking?
Yes. Hello, can you hear me okay?
Yeah. And we can. You sound great.
Thank you. And thank you for the nice compliment. I agree. Everyone looks amazing. And you all look amazing in person too, by the way.
Perfect. Thank you. So we're going to go ahead. You can leave yourself up on with your cameras open. And what we will do is we will only bring you live once we start the session in the room. Thank you.
I am talking to mic 1. Can you guys hear me on Zoom? Well, we just checked the lectern going to Zoom. Are you getting me through Zoom? Check 1, 2. This is me on Zoom. No. Yeah, we're not getting anything on Zoom, Trevor, from the handhelds. I have the handhelds. Are they online with us in Zoom? I am talking to mic 1. Check 1, 2. Hello. They're just getting the podium. Well, yes, but they're just hearing it from the podium. I have been talking to the hand. Check 1, 2. This is no, because 1 and 2 was what we discussed yesterday. Those are going to be our loves. Handheld 1. All right, this is 2.
We need to wrap it up.
This is Zoom. Hello. Can you guys hear me? Yes. Perfect. That's what I like to hear. I think all handhelds right now are good to go.
Perfect. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us in what is a very alarmingly large room for this conversation, but I'm really glad that you're here. My name is Stephen Hutt. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Denver. I am one of two of allyship co-chairs for this year's CHI. And Siobhan, if you want to introduce yourself as well.
Hello, everyone. I'm so jealous that I'm not there with you all in person in Hawaii, but I am here, and I'm an assistant professor and also program director of information science over at North Carolina Central University, and we thank you all so much for joining us today.
So a big goal when we kind of pitched this session was really just to foster a conversation about what it means to be an ally here at CHI, in our interactions, in our engagements with our colleagues, but also in our work, and thinking about particularly some of those invisible acts of allyship and invisible differences that require acts of allyship and how we react to those. I wanted just to quickly introduce our panelists. We've got a great range of panelists there. I think it probably will be easiest for Siobhan, if you could introduce from Zoom. I'm struggling to see right now for the bios, but if you could go ahead, that would be awesome. Thank you.
Awesome. Teamwork makes the dream work. So we are so pleased to present to you these esteemed panelists, and thank you all so much for joining us in this very important conversation. I'm going to start, and please forgive me if I mispronounce your name. You can correct me later. But I'm going to start with Carla Bardillo, and I'm not going to try the next part, so I don't want to mess up your name. Carla, if you'll just say your name and I'll read your bio for you, because I don't want to mess up your last name.
Yeah, no worries. So it's Carla Badillo Urquiola.
Thank you. So Carla is a Claire Booth Luce Assistant Professor in the Department of Computer Science and Engineering within the University of Notre Dame's College of Engineering. She graduated with a PhD and a Master of Science in Modeling and Simulation and a Bachelor of Science in Psychology from the University of Central Florida. Dr. Carla is a human-computer interaction research expert investigating technology-driven solutions that empower people and protect the well-being of youth in marginalized communities, drawing on participatory and critical design methods. Her work has won Best Paper, the top 1%, Best Paper Honorable Mention, top 5%, and Best Poster and Impact Recognition Awards. She is also active in the SIG-Chi Latin American HCI community. Next, I'd like to, and I'll have you come off mute, Gloria, and pronounce your name as well, please.
Gloria Osardu.
All right, Gloria Arsardu is a consumer customer research and insight senior leader, currently heading product experience research efforts at Gusto. She is a software engineer turned user researcher after she spent some time researching human-computer interaction in graduate school. She has spent most of the last decade building and scaling highly effective research teams with the purpose of placing customers and users and their experiences at the center of how companies work backwards from business goals and mission. In her role at Gusto, she oversees 1, initiatives to help teams connect with users more, 2, research operations and enablement efforts, which drive end-to-end research practices, and 3, teams of dedicated researchers who are embedded in product and design teams to drive forward-looking strategic user research. Prior to Gusto, she was at Amazon AWS, leading research teams across several cloud services, including identity, security, commerce platform, and internal tracking, ticketing, government transformation, and storage. Next up, we have Angela Stewart, who is an assistant professor in the University of Pittsburgh School of Computing and Information and Research Sciences at the Learning, Research, and Development Center. Prior to that, she was a postdoctoral fellow in the Human-Computer Interaction Institute at Carnegie Mellon University. She received her PhD in computer science from the University of Colorado Boulder and a Bachelor of Software Engineering from Auburn University. Angela conducts research at the intersection of the learning sciences, artificial intelligence, and human-computer interaction. She uses multimodal data to understand student social and cognitive states, particularly in collaborative STEM learning. She also creates equitable educational spaces by designing technologies that support the agency of students and teachers. And she applies a culturally responsive lens to her research with a particular focus on embodying Black girls' design of transformative technologies. Angela was named the 2021-2022 Emerging Scholar by the International Society of Learning Sciences and currently received a NSF Racial Equity in STEM Award for creating an intersectional AI learning ecosystem for Black girls. And last but certainly not least, on this panel full of women is, and I'll let you pronounce your name too, Ed, if you'll do that for me.
Iyad Yafi. Yes.
So Ed Yaffe is currently a visiting researcher at the University of Technology, Sydney. Ed does research in information retrieval, artificial intelligence, cloud computing, ICTD, and human-computer interaction. Dr. Yaffe has conducted empirical research trying to understand how ICT can foster the development of life skills and qualifications of Syrian youth and children that drive them to become active citizens. He has worked closely with experts from different international organizations, including IDRC and Open Society Institutes. He is also an expert in designing research instruments for Arab youth and is currently conducting research on the use of ICTs and information among Arab migrants in Europe, investigating their information behavior. And these are our panelists.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for introducing our panelists, and I'm sure we can all agree we're in for an interesting discussion, and I'm really thankful for each of the panelists for giving up their time to chat with us today. Just to give you an overview of how the panel is going to run, we're going to start off with some reflections from each of our panelists. Siobhan and I then have some questions that we have prepared in advance to ask our panelists, and then we'll have time for audience Q&A as well as maybe some back and forth conversation, rather maybe a traditional Q&A, but something that allows us to actually have some discourse and chat about these topics. So moving into the main body of the session, we've asked each panelist to give a short reflection and narrative on something that highlights their experiences with allyship. So I'm going to hand over to each of our panelists. You can draw straws for who goes first, but I don't know how you do that in Zoom.
Yeah, I was gonna say I can start us off. So in thinking about sort of my narrative, I'm actually going to give kind of little snippets of ways in which I think I've interacted with allyship, both as a PhD student, because I graduated 2 years ago, and then now as a faculty member, because it has really changed in sort of my positionality and how I think about it. As a PhD student, I was in a CS traditional department working as a HCI researcher, and so a lot of my allyship there was thinking about how do we get these professors to look at HCI as valuable, and so a lot of sort of the feedback that I would get on my research was, where's your algorithm? HCI is a soft science, like it's not an actual engineering, and so it was a lot of disciplinary differences and sort of like being marginalized because you're from a different area of research or an area of place of work. And so I had a lot of experiences in trying to advocate for like intellectual merit and things like that. Now as a professor, that's changed a little bit. And it's more about advocating for my students and not myself anymore. And it's now been advocacy around identities, and so some of my students have physical disabilities that I've had to learn how to be an ally for, because I don't share that identity with them, and so I've had to really like learn a lot of like how do I advocate for a student that I might not share the same identity with. And then also I've had students that have children, so they were pregnant and then they had a child, and I shared that same experience with them, and so having the ability to connect in terms of like how I advocated for myself as a PhD student, but now as a professor and seeing actually like what these sort of private spaces we talk about. A lot of times faculty members advocate for us and we don't see that because it's sort of behind the scenes. So now I can sort of talk to like both being a student and a professor, advocating for the same sort of like issues, but from different lens. So that's kind of, I guess, my narrative or summary in a nutshell.
Thank you.
I'm happy to add on and go next. I also kind of think about my own positionality when it comes to how I approach allyship. In particular, I'm going to talk about it as it relates to doing work with community partners. So in my work, I do work with community organizations in Pittsburgh. And there is always going to be a power differential between professors at kind of large institutions within a city and smaller community organizations. That power differential just comes about because of the institutional power that universities hold, often hold. And so when I think about how I navigate allyship with my community partners, it often looks at how am I um, yielding the power that I have in a way that supports them, their agency, and their goals, and not what I think that their goals should be. So as a particular example of this, one thing that I kind of constantly find myself navigating is the funding structure. Excuse me. Within the funding structure, right, we're doing work with these community organizations, and certainly all of the grant funding money could be an oversight by myself, but instead. Uh, Me alongside my community partners, we made an intentional decision to figure out what are the ways that they can have their own control over, parts of the money that are part of the project that we're working on together. And that did come with, for example, a lot of administrative overhead for me that wouldn't have happened if we had done this in a different way. However, that kind of financial piece is huge. It's incredibly huge for community organizations. Being able to have control over money is one of the, I think, kind of biggest ways that we can think about allyship. As money and finances is just something that is so crucial to being able to do anything in our world. So that's kind of one way that I think about it. And then another way I think about it is consistent relationship building. So as an example, with one of my community partners, they have parent nights where parents and families just kind of come through and chit-chat about whatever the topics that they're interested in are. And in one particular event, they were having an Afrofuturism oriented event, and they were interested in having speakers come in and talk about AI, which is my particular expertise and interest. And even though stuff like this doesn't have a huge benefit to me, I do think that showing up and being there and being intentional about building relationships is a huge key part of allyship. I can go.
So I will give you a different take of how my approach to allyship and equity in research has evolved over the years. So I want you to walk with me on a journey, a brief one. Think back to a kid who was born into or is born into a missionary home. Looking back, I was forced to fit in. I was forced to understand how people organize, how people establish friendship, how people on board to certain things that are culture. And I was forced to have a diverse perspective on like how different cultures and language and ethnicities operate. Back then, it wasn't applied in technology, but I was forced to really be deeply curious about how humans behave. And then, by nature or nurture, I found myself getting into ACI, moving from just building new software, innovation, technology, to understanding how can we build technology for all. And so my journey started from being different, being the one that has to move every 5 years, being the one that is multilingual, being the one that has to form new friendship. Back then, I didn't know what it meant for me to have deep empathy or really seek out allyship to help me fit into it. We returned back into the States, went to grad school, and that's when I started to understand what it means for inclusivity and belonging. I remember figuring out my PhD dissertation in ACI for older adults and kids, and there was no faculty to help me out because it wasn't a thing, and it was just this traditional path of like finding a topic that fit into IS or HCI or software engineering. And so I navigated figuring out which industrial, PhD professor or industry practitioner could be on my committee. It involved me deeply understanding what's different. How can I really talk about what the needle might be for this new pathway that I was forming? And then when I decided to eventually practice in industry, it was this conversation, discussion around research and the quality and what's about and figuring out how insights can really drive innovation in a non-subjective way. But now my approach has changed a lot. In the last 10 years, as Shivan, Dr. Day shared with you all, I have been tasked with building and scaling effective research and insights team. And the way I approach that is looking at two different buckets. The first is, are we really hearing from people who represent our users, whether it's new technology, existing technology, or a new way of bringing equity to the good parts of technology? And I work with a team of brilliant researchers to figure out who is missing, what voices haven't we heard, how do we go out and reach out to folks who traditionally wouldn't give us feedback and insights based on the systems that we've built. And then I also approach it by looking at all the different traits and characteristics and background in invisible ways that our users would want to be heard, and how do we build systems and mechanisms to hear their voices. And over time, one thing is for sure, I have come to accept it as part of my job, but also I've come to understand that I do not know the best way to approach it, but I know that that's the best way to start to be part of the conversation. And so in the industry, I practice building equitable systems by first understanding what's missing, who we haven't heard from, and start to path the way for them to also be part of the conversation around innovation and new products. So that's my journey.
I'm happy to go next. I think I'm the last one. Yeah, I think I'll come with a different story on allyship. I started my ICT for development work back in 2008, back home in Syria. I come from Syria, Middle East. I've worked with local communities, trying to understand the challenges of local communities there and see how technologies, how ICT can play a role in solving some of the challenges faced by the communities. That was back in 2008, and when the Syrian crisis kicked kicked off in 2011, and with the influx of refugees and migrants to neighboring countries, particularly in Lebanon, Jordan, Turkey, and of course the influx of migrants to Europe as well. I've started collaborating with Western researchers on forced migration research. And the story that I would like to share here is mainly about the equitable partnership between Western researchers and local researchers. In this particular use case, I'm talking about Middle Eastern researchers. So I think it's very important that I call out the importance of having that equitable partnership. I think in most of the cases, that concept of equitable partnership wasn't there. Mainly the role of Middle Eastern researchers were like tokenistic. We had tokenistic representations either in grants applications applicable to big funders just to justify the research that's taking place in those places. And of course, the other aspect of the story is in the local communities, the forced migration community. Western researchers kind of exhibited unintentionally like lack of understanding of local context and lack of respect for also local context and customs. So I think this is where my role and other researchers, my colleagues as well, had to step up and try to bridge the gap between the Western researchers and refugee communities through conversations with those Western researchers, educating them about like local customs and power dynamics and the importance of centering refugees' voices. Yeah, so that's the aspect of allyship that I would like to talk about today.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And I appreciate the range of narratives that we just heard in terms of what allyship has meant to different folks. So I really appreciate that. We're going to jump now into some of our pre-prepared discussion questions. And yeah, I will pass over to my co-chair for this section.
Thank you so much, Stephen. I agree. You all shared some very rich personal narratives that really are going to help us with this conversation that we're about to have. And so I'm going to pose a question to one of you, and then I welcome anyone who has anything that they feel to add to the conversation to please do so. So the first question, and I'm going to start with you, Gloria, mainly because you brought us on this wonderful journey about, growing up as a missionary. And so the question that I have is, can you share a moment where allyship played a critical role in your personal or professional life, and just expound upon that just a bit more?
I have a couple of moments, but I'll pick the most recent one. About 5 years ago in industry research, when it comes to ACI, user experience, really looking at how humans use technology for good, we were experiencing a debate. I'll call it a debate. I don't know if it's resolved, but it's this debate that PhD students who were moving into industry were not equipped to do the right research at the right time with the right speed and the right insights to really move product engineering teams to action. And that debate has been long, evolving, but the problem still remains the same. We weren't getting, PhD candidates or PhD graduates who felt that they wanted to do more in-house industry type research to be hired and do quality work. But then in-house, we're also experiencing this issue of everybody was on the job trained, research methods were really fast and quick, and it didn't have the kind of rigor that we'd seen in industry. And then there were a few spaces where research scientists were being hired. And so in that conversation, for me, how I practice allyship, and I think how I grew in understanding and being the voice for PhD candidates, was understanding what the needs are. If we're looking to build technology for all, we are looking to not just lift and shift insights and feedback from users, we needed that kind of rigor, a certain amount of rigor. What that meant was for me to really lean into my background of being, having gone through the academic system, gone through a PhD program, understanding the barriers and the prep that is needed for PhD or folks with PhDs to understand what that hiring process is, what it means for them to showcase what they've done in an academic setting in a way that resonates with the teams that we're hiring, and going through our hiring practices and weaving out what is unnecessary and the things that are truly necessary. So it required me to lean in, ask, learn, unlearn certain things, and at the end of the day, it was about like, what do we need to solve? How do we prepare candidates who have an academic background to really go through the interview and hiring loops to pass it, but also get onto the teams. And that required me to, one, lean onto my background, but two, learn how to advocate for folks who had gone through like their entire academic background in academic system, and helping them understand what's different with the industry and how do they showcase their skill set. So that is the one that sticks with me because it's still like an ongoing debate. But we found from data that when folks with PhD, academic track PhD, come into the industry, they ramp up quickly and they onboard fast, assuming we have the right, mechanisms in place to help them onboard. So that's one that sticks to me up to today.
Thank you so much. Does anyone else want to chime in? If not, I will call on you because I know everybody has something here. And again, remember the question is, can you share a moment where allyship played a critical role in your personal or professional life? And go ahead, Angela. Thanks for coming off mute.
Yeah, totally. I've got something that I can add. So one kind of thing that I've had in a supervisor who was, particularly accommodating to me, and just different things that I needed in the workspace. I expressed needs for some particular accommodations, particularly surrounding time off, right? And she was like, yeah, of course, totally, can totally accommodate it, no problem. And so the reason why I'm bringing that particular thing up is that what I was asking for was outside of the kind of standard of what people usually give or get in terms of time off, right? And so often we hold everyone to a particular standard of how they should behave or who they should be or what work they should do, or what even counts as good or bad work, what counts as rigorous research versus not rigorous research. But often those standards are reflective of dominant norms, right? They're reflective of white supremacy, of patriarchy, of ableism. And so, with allyship, I think that it's important to question what are the norms and standards that we have, and not just change them, but like loudly change them. Loudly change them to where other people are like, or you actually say it out loud. Oh, hey, actually, this is not a good standard, or we're saying that this is what I think, as Gloria was saying earlier, of what counts as computing research or what counts as engineering research was. Her work was just not included in this space, and it wasn't considered to be rigorous enough. But actually, these are all reflective of these kind of dominant and oppressive norms. So, with allyship, I think that it's really important to just be constantly reevaluating what are the standards in which we are evaluating ourselves against, and evaluating others and people in our communities against. And thinking whether or not those are true or important or just reflective of some power dynamics.
I want to just jump in
Excellent.
real quick and just
Yes,
to
sir.
say I really appreciate everything you just said, Angela. I think it ties really nicely into this morning's keynote, thinking about how AI can really reinforce those harmful norms and perpetuate those harmful norms that were norms in the past and need to not be anymore. But when we are training on the past, that's potentially going to be propagated. So I think that ties in really nicely to something that was already shared this morning. And now I'll go back to being quiet.
No, that was perfect, and it's a great point, Angela, as well. We should question those things. Carla or Ed, anything that you all want to share about a personal story? I know, and you all have shared personal story, but anything further that you want to delve into?
Yeah, I really liked what Angela was just talking about, and also a point that Angela made earlier about allyship being a relationship. So a lot of times, what I've kind of been reflecting on in sort of how I serve as an ally for my students, but also an ally like just for ourselves too, because I think a lot of times we talk about like allyship towards others, but we also have a role in like advocating for ourselves. And so one of the things I wanted to highlight was uh, one way that I've really been able to be a better ally is through listening. I think one of the things that I've sort of had to do in learning how to be an ally is kind of like learning to be quiet and just, well, what is it that you need, and how can I serve you, and sort of listening to my students tell me, hey, I need you to do X, Y, and Z, and it's like, okay, like I have the power to do that, so let me help you in that way, since that's how that might be the best way to help you in this situation. I remember my student, she was early in her pregnancy, and I had asked her, like, hey, like, how do you want me to, like, when do you want to share this news, if you want to share this news, and how can I best support you in like getting the accommodations for your courses this semester, so that you can have a successful semester. And actually, like, we went back and forth because I was using my experience a lot of how I was a student when I was pregnant, and I realized that, hey, just because I did certain things during my pregnancy as a student, that doesn't really necessarily mean that my student now needs the same accommodations as I did. And so those are sort of certain ways in that learning how to be a good ally has played a critical role in me being a better ally for my students. So I just wanted to highlight that, those 2 points of like, one, it's a relationship, and so in a relationship you have to learn about the other person and to better like serve. But then two, it's learning that, hey, like, your experiences are different than this other person, and so even though you might be experiencing the same situation, you might have different needs.
Thank you. All right, we'll get to you next, Ed, maybe with this next question, which is, we'll start with you, which is, the next question is, how do you navigate allyship in situations where your privilege may not be visible to others?
Yeah, I think it's so important to use our voices. That's the most important thing. And I think I was put in a position where I was like felt accountable, responsible, and for the whole community, because I was the only researchers that belonged to that community among all these Western researchers. So it felt like really hard, thinking what are the best possibilities and best options that could ensure that any harm or any issues with those communities, making sure that the voices of those communities are heard right, and ensuring that all the materials that got translated, all the transcripts that were collected for the communities are got right and got transferred into like translated into publications. So I was like really ensuring that well understanding and respect of local context and customs are being really well mapped, and ensuring as well that voices and experiences of those refugees were brutalized, across the research that we have been doing. So it's hard when you practice allyship to whole communities, because and then it's also hard when you are felt like as if you're the only one being part of that research. So absolutely, so use the voice, speak up, and also ensuring that those communities, the whole work is centered around those marginalized voices, which is in our context is the forced migrations. So this is my inputs on, yep.
Thank you so much. And I'm wondering, Gloria, with you being a senior leader at your company, could you speak to that? Because I'm sure your privilege sometimes may not be visible, and you might have to let them know. So can you touch on that as well?
Yes, so some of my invisible privileges is understanding what it means to do rigorous research from an academic standpoint compared to industry research. But the other one is what I mentioned in the beginning of my narrative, where I've been fortunate to live in different parts of the world and understand what culture really means. And so in moments where we are scaling teams or delegating teams to do some international research work, and we have to really go beyond the rubric that we have or the core metrics that we are collecting or the data sources that we want to fill in order to get some insights. And it comes to either language or culture, which is an intersectionality of how people use technology, implement, adopt. And when those conversations come up, I see that there's a lot of angst and a lot of uncomfortable feeling, because there's a lot that is riding on some of these insights that translate to what we should do in a company. And I also remember a moment where our data set, it's not diverse enough. And for me, I understand that if you're talking to, for example, small businesses, there's no way that 98% of small businesses are from one group of folks. And so, opening up the lenses and really leaning on to some of the things that I've been privileged to have experienced, or some of the things that I know, really helps bring out the conversation. But I must say this, it's uncomfortable. It requires you to be very vulnerable. And for me, what has helped is committing to consistently speak up. Because I know there are moments which is easier to do that, and there are moments where you're like, I'm the only one. Am I willing to stick up for this particular issue? Am I willing to dedicate bandwidth or resources to go deeper into my conviction? But it has always been to consistently speak up, or even switch the conversation into going deeper into what might be. So there are moments where you have to lean into some privileges that might not be obvious and bring that up, but it also requires you to stand up till the end and say, yes, I vouch for this, and I think this is a good way for us to expand our data sets or our insights bank. So that's an example.
Thank you. Carla or Angela, did you all have anything to add here? If not, we'll move on to the next question, but I want to give you an opportunity as well. Okay. Well, the next question is actually for you all. I want to start with you, Carla. What strategies can be employed to make invisible identities feel acknowledged and supported in the CHI community? Following up with you, Angela.
Yeah, I think in terms of strategies that can be employed, it's learning about, well, what could be those invisible identities that I might not know about, or that might not be apparent to me, right? I think a lot of times we we sort of stick to the conversations that we are accustomed to, or the loud, like the loudest voices in the room, or like the loudest conversations, and then we often forget that, hey, like maybe those loud conversations aren't the only conversations we should be having. There might be other ones that we're overshadowing. And so always kind of being aware of um like who's not just who's in the room, but like who is participating in the conversation and who are we leaving out. And then another strategy, which Gloria kind of like hit on in the last question, is if we if we're not being heard, like having perseverance. So sometimes in this work, it's really easy to get discouraged because we might not be heard the first time we bring up a situation, or the first time we try to advocate. But having that persistence of knowing what's right and like fighting for justice is really important to have. So those are the two strategies.
I can add on. So I want to echo the point that Carla made about kind of self education on what is the range of invisible identities. As an example, things that kind of immediately come to mind for me are like disability status, neurodivergence, sexuality, sexual orientation, gender expression. However, that's not an exhaustive list in any way. But I think that that kind of persistent self-education is important. And then within that self-education, now should come action for us within the Kai community. So as a specific example of something that I see very often when I'm reading papers is in demographic reporting. It is very common for folks to report demographics as male and female and leave it as that and strictly binarizing it. And this ignores that people might hold other gender identities that are either not reported or not included in the sample. And so this might seem like a really small thing, right? Especially if everyone in your sample reported as being a man or a woman. It might seem like a small thing. However, it's not, right? It's actually a huge thing to show, and in your writing actually show that you not only know and understand that there's a range of gender identities that a person might have, but that you are thinking about that and accounting for that as you're doing your work, right? And so things that the Kai community could do, right, to think about this. One, when you're writing, when you're analyzing data, think about what are the actual important dimensions on which I'm analyzing this data. I'm reporting gender. Am I reporting gender comprehensively, accurately, as an example? But also I think that reviewers play a huge role in this. I think reviewers play a huge role in calling these things out when we're seeing them in papers that we're reading. And then finally, there's, even that kind of higher level of the associate chairs, program chairs, right, of supporting reviewers and saying, hey, these are the kinds of things that you might want to consider as you are reading these papers. And perhaps, for example, how we're reporting gender is a big one, of just saying, hey, everyone, let's be inclusive inclusive and intentional about how we report gender as a sole example.
Very good. Does anyone else have anything to add to those points? Very good points too, and very good strategies.
I have a quick note. One thing comes to mind. The first, well, two things. The first is understanding that the Kai community is a community, an aligning community, and really always anchoring to the purpose and the audience, the folks that we want to benefit from the community, and looking to see who is not in the community today. How can we expand? How can we ensure that those who are even currently in the community are thriving? So for me, it's like a lifelong learning of understanding, okay, this is where we are. We still got a lot of work to do. We are committing to the work that we need to do. And then of course, feedback going beyond like the simple check it, but like getting to hear folks and really map their intersectionality in some of the, invisible situations or kind of layers that our community have. And then the second is understanding. This is something that I learned over time, and it's a muscle that I build all the time. Understanding that privilege doesn't look a certain way. So it can be that like you are on a committee, you see most things, you are really trying to have the committee expand the way that things have been done. Or it could be that you're the first to experience certain things, right? Whether you're a reviewer or you've attended Kai before, like what do you know that puts you in the position of privilege to advise or better the process? And then lastly, I think somebody talked about financing. Um, for me, I know what it means to be a student. I know what it means to not be able to afford a conference. And so when I leap into that, I'm like, okay, my privilege is knowing what it means to be a student or a first-time Kai member or someone on the committee or even planning a session. What have I learned that others don't know? And for me, those are the little moments that I'm like, regardless of everything, I still have that privilege. How do I use it? How do I spend it on others? How do I really keep building so that I can give out to other people? So those are a couple, yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Ian, I'll have you start with this next question. In what ways can allyship be misinterpreted, and how can we avoid those pitfalls?
Yeah, it's very interesting because I think in most of the cases, well intentions, are there when it comes to allieships and dealing with like communities or researchers. But yeah, those allieships gets misinterpreted, and so I think it's very important that we talk about the formative allyship. Like normally, people tend to publicly display support for like marginalized communities, but without taking really meaningful actions or to challenge systems of oppressions. I think to avoid that, I think there should be a focus on sustained actions and accountabilities. So sustainability is very important here. Actions. I think engaging in ongoing education, awareness, engage in difficult conversations whenever possible, and also actively work to dismantle system of inequalities, whether that's intentional or unintentional. So I think these are the key actions that I think we should call out, mainly education, awareness, and also speaking up and engage in all these difficult conversations where possible. And I think we have a role to play here. In my case, as I mentioned, so I felt like as the only representative of those communities, so ensuring that any intentional or unintentional harm that was caused to those communities is minimized.
Thank you. And Gloria, I was going to ask you about this question too. I know you just chimed in on the last note, but did you have a thought here as well?
Can you repeat the question again?
Yes, the question is, in what ways can allyship be misinterpreted, and how can we avoid these pitfalls?
Yes, I think in most cases where you are, we have all been in situations where you're forced to speak up, or sometimes you feel like you have to speak up because that's the right thing to do, but you're not armed to do that in a way that I think it was Carla who talked about that relationship. If there's no relationship, we actually fall into the pit of like, okay, you are trying to be an ally, but I have no relationship with you, or this is for show. And I think it goes to this structure of like build a foundation, educate yourself, learn more about how to do that well, really figure out the avenues to really speak up. I think there was an example that talked about like, someone on a team that required like accommodations for pregnancy or for classes. These are things that happen in private. And the pitfall is when we tend to, at the first moment, do it in public without having a relationship, we tend to fall into the pitfall of like, is this for show? Do I have a relationship? Can I trust you? And then the converse is also true, where you are too scared that you might come off as being performative, that you don't say anything. And also that's a pitfall because there's so many moments you look back and like, I should have spoken up or I should have done something. And you're like, in that moment, I didn't want to seem like the one who's always calling out like accommodations for other people or inclusivity or belonging. And I think those end to end have to be balanced in order to not fall into that pitfall. Yeah.
Thank you. Angela or Carla, anything to add to that point? Oh, both of you came off mute, so whichever wants to go first and then next.
Yeah, I was just going to sort of highlight something that I think Angela said earlier, that awareness is not enough. I think a misinterpretation of allyship is that, oh, if I am aware of an inequity or like that I see it, like that's enough because I can identify it. But it's not enough because it's not just that you can identify it, it's like what are you doing about it to make it to decrease it, right? Like so not just awareness, but action. Like, how are you taking action upon your awareness? I think is important.
And I'd like to add one thing. So first, I really love this question, and I really love how everyone has highlighted that awareness isn't enough. Also, just like kind of saying something isn't always enough. But I'd like to add on that I like to think about allyship in terms of shifting power. And I, in particular, am inspired by and utilize often Patricia Hill Collins' Matrix of Domination as how I think about power. And so, in that framework, she talks about how power operates in laws and policies, how those laws and policies are enforced, in cultural ideas, kind of hegemonic ideas, as well as in individual people's experiences. And so she, outlines these four kind of dimensions. And so when I'm approaching allyship, and I also think that when anyone is approaching allyship, perhaps you can use something like that as a way to think about, okay, what am I actually doing, right? Am I supporting a change in a law or policy in some way? Am I advocating for a change in how laws and policies are enforced, right? Am I making some sort of change in oppressive cultural ideas? Am I supporting someone in having a different interpersonal experience, having a different personal experience that is now no longer oppressive than might have been? And so I think that we can leverage what existing scholars in Black feminist theory and queer theory, in disability theory, as another example, pull what all of these scholars have said about what is power and how does power operate, and then we can use those frames to evaluate whether or not we're truly being allies.
Thank you so much. This last question is for all of you, and then we'll get into some Q&A. And the question is, what are some subtle acts of allyship that you all believe could make a difference? What are people missing?
Yep, I can go first. I think in my context, I think the most important thing is to amplify marginalized voices. So this is where I think is the most important point to share, promote the work, ideas, perspectives of those communities, marginalized communities. So yeah, so ensuring that their voices, their experiences, their knowledge is being shared and recognized. And the other thing is also to challenge any stereotypes or biasness. So biases, so this is very important because normally researchers come with all these sort of stereotypes. So I think we should speak up when we witness or hear any stereotype or biased remarks against any local community that we are working with. Challenge those stereotypes and ensure that alternative perspectives are available to foster understanding on those communities that we are working with. So, yep, so 2 points, amplify marginalized voices and challenge those stereotypes and biases.
Thank you. Go ahead, Carla.
I can add on to what Iyad was just saying. In particular, totally agree with the amplifying marginalized voices. A couple of ways that folks can do this. One, we're a community of scholars. We often write papers, read and cite the work of marginalized scholars. So read and cite the work of Black scholars, of queer scholars, scholars with disabilities, as an example. And then another thing is really pay attention to social dynamics and power dynamics in meetings. So think, for example, in a faculty meeting, if you see a woman says something that is perhaps goes ignored, but maybe a man says that exact same thing and it doesn't go ignored. All it takes is just one quick sentence of, hey, so-and-so, yeah, I love that point you made. Actually, so-and-so also said this thing, and maybe we can hear a little bit more from them on what they're thinking on this topic. So it's just like these really kind of small ways of shifting the focus within reason in ways that, you know, if a person wants the focus to be shifted to them, of course. But shifting the focus kind of towards thinking about and hearing from folks who are marginalized in whatever context we're talking about.
Carla, I'm sorry. Okay, you want to go ahead? I know Carla was talking the same time as Anne. Do you want to go,
Oh, no,
Carla? Gloria will let you finish it up.
Yeah, Gloria can go. Oh, okay. I was just going to say similar things that Iyad and Angela said in terms of like citing each other's work, but also one thing that I think is very subtle but that is very powerful is cheering each other on. So for example, I use social media a lot, and I always love like congratulating like students or my peers when they publish a paper or when they get an award or like just reposting their posts, because if we can at least cheer each other on, then other people know about our accomplishments and can and that's another way in which people get to know about the work of others. So yeah.
That's a great point. And I am a professional cheer you on person. I think all of you know that about me. And Gloria, will leave it to you to finish this up here.
Yes, the first thing that comes to mind is hold space, especially in my context. And even I think it applies to, you know, researchers, all of us in the Kai community. Hold space. We are privileged to be in conversations, to be in conferences, to do amazing research. What it means to hold space is to say, this is my lot, this is my space, I'm going to share it. I'm going to hold it, I'm going to share it, I'm going to hand it off, or I'm going to break a piece of my space and then share with somebody else, which means that in a world where things are moving fast, in a world where it's uncomfortable to even pause and think about alternatives, like what it means is we are holding space and saying, it's worth us rethinking this process. It's worth us like looking at these papers that may not fit into or criteria is worth it to listen to some of these non-traditional voices. And the kind of the part B of that is for us to intentionally be interpreters of other marginalized voices. For me, I live in a space where sometimes it's kind of like, oh, because of the accent, I can't understand, or because of the way the person wrote the paper, or the way that the person is winded in like talking about the culture and everything that is affecting the research, we can get to the point, and it means that we're glossing over a lot of these conversations. So that, and topping it off with what we've all shared about like amplifying voices. I think those are subtle ways that you can say, like, yes, I'm holding space. Yes, I'm trying to interpret what I'm hearing to others who may easily gloss over, and then I'm here to cheer others on too. So, yeah.
Thank you all so much for sharing your personal narratives and experiences and your strategies for how we can be better as a community. I'm going to pass it back over to my co-chair, Stephen, to see what his thoughts are on this discussion.
Yeah, this was a really great discussion. Thank you so much, everyone, for your answers to the questions. I was taking some notes as we were going through and really kind of pulling out those themes of awareness is not enough, and I really enjoyed how everyone talked about those acts of allyship and things that can be done. And those last points of really actionable items I think were really, really helpful. We're a smaller number here in the room, but we wanted to make sure there was space for folks to ask questions or to join in the discussion. We have 2 microphones in the room. If anyone would like to ask a question or join the panel, yeah, if you could please come up to the microphone just so it'll go out to the Zoom.
Hello, is that microphone working?
There we go, I think so.
I'm Duncan Stevenson from the Australian National University in Canberra. My question is, do you get any support from your institutions at a higher level for this? And my example is we have 2,500 students with a registered disability, and we have federal legislation that mandates that we accommodate them. Do you have any support at that level?
I can talk about this. So in our, I would say yes and no, and that it depends. So in my university, we have a sort of a department that is in charge of providing the necessary accommodations to students. So for example, a student that enters my lab that might need some sort of accommodation can go to this department and request officially those accommodations. And so then they have letters that get sent to their professors for courses or that sort of outline the types of accommodations that they need in terms of like testing or environment and things like that. So there are sort of like official channels in our university that students can go to. However, I would say that those channels are typically not enough. So for example, my PhD student came to the university, didn't have a way to get across campus because our campus is very inaccessible. And so I had to actually advocate to my department for them to help us purchase a scooter for my student so that he can navigate the campus a little bit easier. I've also had to sort of like tell my department that, hey, like we should probably have some financial resources available to students that might not have travel funds. So this is outside of disabilities, but and so while we do have sort of like offices on campus that help with certain aspects of accommodations. I think as an advisor, I've had to also sort of advocate at the departmental level for specific needs that my students have that go beyond the general norms.
I would love to just add to that I anecdotally notice, at least at my own institution, that the students that are least aware of the resources available to them are our first generation college students, and that's a group that correlates with a lot of other groups, and they need that support as well, but they often don't have someone advocating for them, and they are just inexperienced with the system. So I think that's another interesting point relevant to your question there. Are there any other questions in the room that anyone would like to ask? Yeah. Come on up. Thank you. Folks on Zoom, you can't see the sort of aircraft hangar that we're in right now, but it takes a second to walk across.
Yeah, it's a good walk. So I'm Mike Jones from Brigham Young University in Provo, Utah. One thing I struggle with in trying to be an ally for students in my department is seeing them. So we recently ran a survey of our students to better understand their sense of belonging and their sense of acceptance within our program. One of the big problems we had is that we didn't get a big response from first generation college students, students who are economically disadvantaged, or students who identify as LGBTQ+. So I'm wondering if you have some thoughts about how to better be an ally for students that are hard to see, especially in large surveys. Thank you, great panel.
So I have some thoughts on this. I'm not sure that I have the exact answer to your question, because I think that you're asking a really big and kind of complicated question that many of us encounter. But I do at least want to shed some light on some additional considerations. And that is that it's not always safe for students to identify as having a disability, as being in the LGBTQ plus community, as identifying as low income, or and even further, even if they feel safe, openly identifying in that space, they might not feel safe identifying and criticizing as, say, a Black student at a predominantly white institution, as an example. And so I think that the first kind of step is thinking about and addressing what are the potential social implications of a student filling out this form. What are the potential social implications of a student, responding to the survey, seeking accommodation, and thinking about how you might address those. Going back to my example of perhaps a student is a Black student at a predominantly white institution, and they've been asked to fill out, some survey on campus climate, as an example. In that case, once the survey might be anonymous, or it might be said that it's anonymous, but once they identify their race, their year they are in school, their major, they might be down to being one of 3 students, right? And so they might feel like, oh, just by the kind of process of elimination, my answers have now been de-anonymized, right? One thing that you can do or think about doing is intentionally creating spaces and places for feedback that are safe for those students, and that are spaces where they can kind of remain anonymous. For example, maybe there's a faculty member who has a close relationship with a number of students and can kind of be that third party, kind of barrier for them, and can be that person that can help advocate for them. However, one other thing I will add is that often the person who is in power and who often underrepresented students do have relationships with are also underrepresented, like faculty themselves. So it's really likely, for example, if you're trying to reach Black students, that the faculty that they are going to feel safest around is going to be a Black faculty, as an example, right? And so I think it's also worth paying attention to how is now that faculty being appropriately compensated? How is their time being appropriately compensated? How is this factoring into their tenure packet as another example? And so, like, this is just kind of one kind of small example of how this problem touches on many parts of the system, right? So it's not about like a single intervention, but instead it's about thinking about holistic intervention. And because, racism is systemic, right? And so our like responses to it also needs to be systemic. So yeah, perhaps that's something you could think a little bit, I guess, think a little further on. It's not necessarily like a silver bullet kind of a answer, but instead more of a consider that kind of holistic perspective.
I would love to just riff quickly on something Angela said there about like that compensation piece. Something that we've been trying at DU has been saying, for every faculty member, part of your service is having like 1 hour of office hours that isn't just for your classes, but is for our whole community. And then that safety that's built up with students that maybe you don't see regularly anymore, they still have a way that they know at that time they can come and see someone that they maybe built a relationship with 2-3 quarters ago, but it facilitates that connection being carried on, because I mean, all too often I see my students for one class and then I don't see them for a while until they enroll in my next class. And so that's been something we've been trying, is just like an actionable way of like, yes, like this is something that's super important to me. Like, I'm a member of the LGBT community, and I see that in my students that they do feel more comfortable with me, and even after they've left my class, they may still come to me for advice for a different class or for a different situation. So that's one way of like creating that and perpetuating that safety.
I want to add one thing too. That was such a great question and great answer, Angela. I want to just put one point out there for everyone to remember and think about that Gloria mentioned earlier. Remember, this will be an iterative process. We will never get to a point or a stopping point, right? We all need to always constantly challenge the status quo, go back, look again, and see how we can continuously be better. So even though, as you pointed out, that was a complicated question, there's no real just one narrow solution. It's more of a continuous conversation. And hopefully in time, as we all continue to grow and get better, and that's why these conversations are so important, because there is not a stopping point. The world is so diverse, and we haven't always been respecting those diverse voices. So we just need to continue to be iterative in that process, and just know that it will be ongoing work that we're going to have to continue to strive for each and every year or semester, or however your university is choosing to approach this matter.
And that aspirational statement, I think, is the perfect time to wrap up. Thank you so much to all of our panelists, to everyone here in the room, and to the AV folks from the conference center who have made this hybrid experience really seamless. Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful rest of your conference.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you to our panelists.